The first indication that humanity's carefully constructed moral framework was about to shatter came not through official channels, but through a grainy video transmission intercepted by civilian operators in the Kepler 442 system. The timestamp read 238715, 61432 TST, and what it showed would fundamentally alter the trajectory of human civilization forever. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been tending to wounded civilians in a makeshift medical station on Proxima Centauri when the vegan assault ships descended through the crimson-tinged atmosphere. The Universal Red Cross emblazoned on the facility's roof meant nothing to the alien aggressors. Their plasma bombardment turned the medical compound into superheated glass within seconds, vaporizing not just Dr. Vasquez and her team of 12 medics, but also the 347 wounded civilians they had been treating. The intercepted transmission showed the aftermath in horrifying detail. Vegan ground troops, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming with condensed moisture from the planet's humid air, methodically executed any survivors they found crawling from the wreckage. The aliens moved with mechanical precision, their compound eyes reflecting no emotion as they fired their energy weapons into the backs of fleeing children, elderly colonists, and the few medical personnel who had survived the initial bombardment. What made this particular atrocity different from the dozens that had preceded it was the presence of Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, an embedded war correspondent whose combat suit's recording systems captured every moment. The footage reached Earth's Global Defense Council within 72 hours, transmitted through quantum relay networks that bypassed normal military censorship protocols. The reaction was immediate and unprecedented. For the first time in 3 centuries, every nation on Earth, every colony world, every asteroid mining consortium, and every deep space exploration fleet spoke with a single voice. The carefully worded diplomatic protests that had characterized humanity's response to previous vegan aggression were replaced by something far more primal and infinitely more dangerous. Admiral Marcus Sterling, the grizzled veteran who commanded humanity's Third Fleet, was in conference with the Martian Defense Authority when the footage reached his flagship. His aide, Captain Jennifer Park, later described watching the color drain from Sterling's face as the video played. When it ended, Sterling remained silent for nearly 10 minutes, his weathered hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "How many times?" Sterling finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir?" Captain Park responded, uncertain what he meant. "How many times have they targeted our medical facilities, our clearly marked civilian shelters? Our evacuation ships?" Park consulted her datapad, cross-referencing incident reports from across human space. 47 confirmed attacks on medical facilities, sir. 23 attacks on clearly marked civilian evacuations. 81 documented executions of prisoners attempting to surrender. Sterling's response would be quoted in history books for generations to come. "Then they've made their choice. Signal the Defense Council. Tell them Admiral Sterling recommends we stop pretending we're fighting a civilized war." The message that went out across human space 6 hours later carried the authentication codes of every major political leader, military commander, and colonial governor. It was brief, consisting of only 3 paragraphs, but its implications would reshape the galaxy. The first paragraph formally withdrew humanity from the Galactic Convention on Warfare, citing systematic violations by vegan forces and the complete breakdown of civilized conduct in the conflict. The second paragraph suspended all restrictions on combat operations, effective immediately. The third paragraph contained a single sentence that sent shockwaves through every alien civilization monitoring human communications. "All assets are hereby authorized for immediate deployment." What the aliens didn't understand, what their intelligence services had somehow failed to grasp despite 3 years of warfare, was the significance of those final 4 words. All assets didn't just refer to humanity's conventional military forces. It referred to resources that had been deliberately kept in reserve, technologies that had been developed but never deployed, and most significantly, personnel who had been carefully excluded from combat operations for reasons the aliens were about to discover. The first hint of what was coming emerged from the Titan Maximum Security Facility, a prison complex buried deep beneath the ice of Saturn's largest moon. For 2 centuries, Titan had housed humanity's most dangerous criminals, war criminals from the corporate wars, genocidal dictators from the African consolidation, the architects of the Luna City massacre, and individuals whose crimes were so heinous that even their names had been expunged from public records. Dr. Rose, Elizabeth Warren, the facility's chief psychologist, had spent her entire career studying these individuals, her classified research, known only to a handful of government officials, had reached a disturbing conclusion. Among humanity's worst criminals were individuals who possessed an almost supernatural ability to wage war. They understood violence not as a tool or a means to an end, but as an art form requiring creativity, intuition, and an absolute absence of moral restraint. When the authorization codes reached Titan, Dr. Warren found herself face to face with men and women she had interviewed but hoped never to see released. Colonel Viktor Kozlov, architect of the Martian genocide, smiled when she explained the situation. "So," he said, his accent thick with decades of isolation, "the sheep have finally realized they need wolves." Maria Santos, the butcher of Europa, laughed when she heard the news. 300 years too late, she said, but better late than never. The most disturbing reaction came from Dr. Heinrich Weber, whose experiments during the corporate wars had earned him a place in humanity's collective nightmares. When Dr. Warren explained that the government was offering full pardons in exchange for military service, Weber's response chilled her to the bone. "Tell them I accept, but I'll need a laboratory. And test subjects. Lots of test subjects." Within 72 hours, transport ships were docking at Titan's heavily shielded ports. The prisoners who boarded those ships had spent decades in isolation, their minds focused entirely on perfecting their understanding of warfare and human nature. They emerged, blinking into the light of Saturn's distant sun, as fundamentally changed individuals, their criminal expertise refined by years of contemplation into something approaching pure malevolence. The aliens monitoring human communication networks noted increased military traffic but failed to understand its significance. Their intelligence services, accustomed to the predictable patterns of human warfare, categorized the prisoner releases as a desperate attempt to bolster troop numbers. They had no conception that humanity was fundamentally altering the nature of the conflict. Meanwhile, in research facilities hidden throughout human space, technologies that had been developed but never deployed were being rushed into production. The Geneva Biological Weapons Convention had been suspended along with all other warfare restrictions, and laboratory technicians found themselves working around the clock to produce weapons that their predecessors had only theorized about. Dr. Rajesh Patel, director of the Classified Biological Warfare Program on Sirius Station, received his authorization codes while reviewing safety protocols that had prevented his research from ever being weaponized. His laboratory had spent 40 years developing defensive countermeasures against potential biological attacks, and in the process, his team had inadvertently created some of the most virulent pathogens in known space. "Are you certain about this?" Dr. Patel asked the Defense Council representative who delivered his new orders. "The Vegans targeted medical facilities," came the reply. "They executed wounded civilians. They've made it clear they don't recognize any distinction between combatants and non-combatants. We're simply returning the favor." The implications of what was being unleashed began to dawn on humanity's allies throughout the galaxy. The Altarian Republic, which had maintained careful neutrality throughout the conflict, suddenly found its diplomatic channels flooded with urgent communications from human representatives. The message was consistent across all channels. Any alien vessels found in human space after a specified deadline would be considered hostile regardless of their stated intentions. The Crystalline Collective, whose trade agreements with humanity dated back centuries, received an even more direct warning. Human merchant vessels began evacuating collective space en masse, their captains citing revised security protocols that made continued trade impossible. When collective representatives pressed for explanations, they were told simply that humanity is implementing new strategic doctrines that make civilian casualties inevitable. Even the Andromedan Alliance, humanity's oldest and most trusted allies, found their diplomatic immunity suddenly limited. Human military escorts appeared around every Alliance vessel in human space, ostensibly for protection, but clearly capable of fulfilling other functions if necessary. Alliance Admiral Zara Prime's encrypted communication to her government captured the growing alarm among humanity's friends. Something has fundamentally changed. The humans we've known for 3 centuries no longer exist. Part 2, the unleashing the transformation of human warfare doctrine became apparent to the Vegan Empire exactly 73 days after the Proxima Centauri medical station massacre, when their expeditionary fleet encountered what they initially assumed to be a standard human patrol group in the Wolf 359 system. The Vegan force consisted of 47 heavy cruisers and their support vessels, commanded by War Admiral Klox Thule, a veteran of 17 successful campaigns against various species throughout the galaxy. War Admiral Klox Thule's tactical computers identified the approaching human force as a single heavy cruiser accompanied by 2 escort destroyers. The disparity in firepower was so enormous that Claxthull's primary concern was ensuring that the human vessels didn't escape to report vegan fleet movements. His tactical staff prepared for what they anticipated would be a brief engagement, followed by the systematic destruction of human defensive positions throughout the system. The human heavy cruiser identified itself as the UES Nemesis. Under the command of Captain Viktor Kozlov, vegan intelligence files contained no record of this vessel or its commander, which struck some of Claxthull's staff as unusual, but the War Admiral dismissed their concerns. Human military doctrine was well understood after 3 years of conflict, and individual ship commanders rarely deviated from established tactical patterns. What happened next would be studied in military academies throughout the galaxy for generations, though many of the tactical details remain classified to this day. The Nemesis approached the vegan fleet directly, making no attempt at evasion or tactical maneuvering. Long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures from the human vessel, but the readings were inconsistent with any known human weapon systems. When the engagement began, the Nemesis demonstrated capabilities that violated every known principle of human technology. Its weapons fired at frequencies that bypassed vegan shielding entirely, while its hull absorbed direct hits from vegan plasma cannons without apparent damage. More disturbing than its technological capabilities, however, was the tactical doctrine its commander employed. Rather than attempting to destroy the vegan vessels quickly, Captain Kozlov systematically disabled their engines and weapon systems, leaving them defenseless but intact. His targeting was precise enough to knock out specific subsystems without destroying the ships entirely, a level of accuracy that should have been impossible given the ranges involved. Within 30 minutes, the entire vegan fleet found itself completely helpless, drifting in space with no means of escape or resistance. What followed defied every understanding of human warfare that the vegans had developed. Instead of demanding surrender or attempting to capture prisoners, Captain Kozlov opened communication channels to every disabled vessel simultaneously. His message, broadcast in flawless vegan, demonstrated an intimate understanding of their psychology and cultural structure. "I am Captain Viktor Kozlov of the human vessel Nemesis," his transmission began. "I am what your species would call a war criminal. My government released me from prison specifically to fight your kind, because they have finally realized that monsters require other monsters to defeat them." The psychological impact of this revelation on the vegan crews was immediate and devastating. Their species' rigid military hierarchy depended on the assumption that they faced predictable, honor-bound human opponents. The concept that humanity might deliberately deploy individuals who operated outside all moral constraints was so alien to vegan thinking that many crew members experienced what human psychologists would recognize as acute panic responses. Captain Kozlov continued his broadcast, describing in clinical detail what would happen to each vegan vessel. His knowledge of vegan anatomy, psychology, and culture was encyclopedic, suggesting access to intelligence resources that far exceeded anything the vegans had attributed to human capabilities. More disturbing was his obvious enthusiasm for the task ahead, emotional response that vegan tactical doctrine had never accounted for. "Your War Admiral's flagship will be dealt with last," Kozlov explained, "so that Claxthull can observe what happens to his subordinates. I want him to understand, viscerally, what his species has unleashed by targeting our medical personnel." The systematic destruction of the vegan fleet took 11 hours. Each vessel was boarded by human troops wearing powered armor that bore no resemblance to standard military equipment. The boarding parties moved through vegan ships with mechanical efficiency, but their objectives weren't military in any conventional sense. They captured specific individuals from each crew, apparently selected according to criteria that made sense only to Captain Kozlov and his personnel. Vegan military doctrine emphasized honor in death, expecting captured personnel to resist interrogation and maintain military discipline even under extreme duress. What they encountered instead was something their training had never prepared them for. The humans who boarded their vessels weren't soldiers in any sense that vegans understood. They were specialists whose expertise lay in understanding and exploiting the psychological vulnerabilities of other species. Dr. Delancey Heinrich Weber, recently released from Titan Maximum Security Facility, had been given access to decades of xenopsychological research. His laboratory aboard the Nemesis contained equipment that allowed him to monitor vegan neurological responses in real time, identifying exactly which stimuli produced the maximum psychological trauma. His methods were precise, scientific, and utterly without compassion. The key to breaking their resistance, Weber explained in his detailed reports to Earth Command, is understanding that vegan psychology is fundamentally different from human psychology. What would constitute torture for a human might be merely uncomfortable for a vegan, while techniques that seem benign to us can produce complete psychological collapse in their species. The information extracted from the captured vegans during those 11 hours provided human intelligence services with a complete picture of enemy operations throughout the galaxy. Fleet movements, supply lines, command structures, strategic objectives, and most importantly, the locations of vegan civilian populations were all systematically documented and transmitted to human military planners. War Admiral Clax Thule, forced to watch the systematic processing of his crews, experienced what human psychologists would classify as a complete mental breakdown. His final transmission to Vegan High Command, intercepted and decoded by human intelligence services, provided crucial insights into enemy thinking. The humans have become something else entirely. They are no longer the species we have been fighting. Request immediate strategic withdrawal from all human territories. We cannot defeat what they have become. The response from Vegan High Command demonstrated their complete failure to understand the situation. Instead of authorizing withdrawal, they dispatched additional fleets with orders to determine what new weapons humanity had deployed. Their strategic thinking remained locked into conventional military paradigms, unable to comprehend that the fundamental nature of their opponents had changed. Captain Kozlov's final act in the Wolf 359 system established a pattern that would be repeated throughout human space. After extracting all useful intelligence from the captured vegans, he released a single survivor from each vessel with a specific message for Vegan High Command. Each survivor had been psychologically conditioned to experience severe trauma responses when attempting to describe their experiences, ensuring that their testimony would be dismissed as unreliable by vegan military analysts. However, embedded within each survivor's traumatized psyche were carefully implanted suggestions that would activate under specific conditions. These mental triggers contained detailed intelligence about human strategic capabilities, but in a form that would only become accessible to vegan interrogators if they employed the same psychological techniques that humans had used. The result was a trap that would force the vegan empire to either ignore valuable intelligence or adopt methods that would fundamentally corrupt their own military culture. The strategic brilliance of this approach became apparent over the following months as vegan military doctrine began to fracture. Some commanders, desperate for intelligence about human capabilities, authorized the use of psychological techniques similar to those employed by Captain Kozlov. These commanders achieved tactical successes but found their crews increasingly unwilling to serve under officers who had abandoned traditional vegan honor codes. Other commanders refused to compromise their ethical standards and found themselves repeatedly outmaneuvered by human forces that seemed to anticipate their every tactical decision. The intelligence embedded in the conditioned survivors provided such accurate predictions of vegan behavior that human commanders could plan operations with near-perfect foreknowledge of enemy responses. Meanwhile, throughout human space, similar transformations were occurring as other released criminals assumed command positions. Maria Santos, the Butcher of Europa, took command of human ground forces in the Tau Ceti system. Her approach to urban warfare involved tactics that conventional military doctrine considered unconscionably brutal, but which proved devastatingly effective against vegan occupation forces. Santos understood that the key to defeating the vegans lay not in destroying their military forces, but in demonstrating that continued occupation of human worlds would exact costs that far exceeded any possible benefits. Her campaigns transformed every human city into a nightmare of booby traps, psychological warfare, and civilian populations trained to view vegan soldiers as existential threats requiring immediate elimination. The effectiveness of her methods became apparent when vegan garrison commanders began requesting transfers away from human-occupied territories. Military service that had been considered routine assignment became punishment duty that even veteran vegan soldiers feared. The psychological toll of operating in environments where every civilian encounter might result in death began to degrade vegan military effectiveness throughout their occupied territories. Dr. Weber, meanwhile, had established research facilities on captured vegan worlds where he could study alien populations under controlled conditions. His experiments, designed to identify species-specific vulnerabilities, produced weapons that targeted vegan biology with surgical precision. More importantly, his research demonstrated that the techniques developed on vegans could be adapted for use against any alien species, providing humanity with capabilities that could threaten the entire galactic community. The implications of Weber's research reached Earth's leadership through carefully compartmentalized intelligence reports. The technological capabilities he was developing could potentially eliminate entire alien civilizations without affecting human populations, but deployment of such weapons would fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with every other spacefaring species in the galaxy. Part 3. The Reckoning. The true scope of humanity's transformation became apparent to the galactic community during the Battle of Vega Prime, 6 months after the Wolf 359 incident. What the aliens had initially dismissed as isolated tactical innovations revealed themselves as components of a comprehensive strategic doctrine that threatened the basic assumptions underlying interstellar civilization. Vega Prime served as the administrative capital for the Vegan Empire's expansion into human space, housing not only significant military installations, but also the civilian infrastructure that supported their war effort. The system's defenses included 47 orbital platforms, 300 defensive satellites, and a fleet of over 200 warships. Vegan strategic planners considered it impregnable, a fortress that could withstand assault by any conceivable human force. The human attack force that emerged from hyperspace consisted of just 12 vessels, led by Admiral Sarah Chen aboard the heavy cruiser UES Retribution. Vegan tactical computers calculated the disparity in firepower and concluded that the human force represented either a reconnaissance probe or a suicide mission. War Admiral Zek Thule, commanding the system's defenses, prepared to demonstrate vegan superiority by destroying the human ships with minimal losses. What neither Zekthul nor his staff understood was that the 12 human vessels represented the culmination of everything humanity had learned about warfare since the systematic study of violence had begun. Each ship incorporated technologies that had been theoretical just months earlier, crewed by individuals whose understanding of conflict transcended conventional military thinking. Admiral Chen herself exemplified this transformation. Before her capture and execution by vegan forces during the early stages of the war, she had been a competent but unremarkable fleet officer. Her resurrection through experimental medical technology, combined with psychological conditioning designed to eliminate human moral constraints, had created something that transcended traditional military leadership. The weak version of myself died on Kepler 438b, Admiral Chen explained in her final report to Earth Command. What the Vegans killed was limited by human compassion, human mercy, and human reluctance to embrace the full scope of what warfare could become. They have given me the gift of freedom from such limitations. The Battle of Vega Prime began with a tactical maneuver that violated every principle of space combat that the Vegans understood. Instead of attempting to engage the orbital defenses at long range, Admiral Chen's fleet moved directly toward the planet's surface, apparently ignoring the massive firepower being directed against them. Vegan gunners achieved multiple direct hits, but the human vessels absorbed damage that should have been catastrophic without apparent effect. The secret lay in technologies that Dr. Weber's research teams had developed through their study of captured alien materials. Human ships now incorporated adaptive armor systems that learned from each incoming attack, becoming progressively more resistant to enemy weapons. More significantly, they deployed self-repair systems based on nanotechnology that could reconstruct damaged components faster than conventional weapons could destroy them. But technology alone didn't explain what happened at Vega Prime. The human tactical doctrine had evolved beyond mere technological superiority into something that approached artistic expression. Each human vessel moved with perfect coordination, their actions synchronized at a level that suggested either telepathic communication or computational abilities that far exceeded known human capabilities. The truth was more disturbing than either explanation. The criminals released from Titan Maximum Security Facility had spent decades studying conflict not as a military exercise, but as a form of creative expression. Their understanding of warfare encompassed psychological, cultural, technological, and strategic elements woven together into comprehensive systems that treated entire civilizations as components in vast tactical equations. Admiral Chen's attack on Vega Prime simultaneously targeted military installations, civilian infrastructure, communication networks, and the psychological foundations that held Vegan society together. Her weapons didn't simply destroy physical targets, they were designed to create specific psychological responses in both military personnel and civilian populations. The orbital defense platforms found their targeting systems compromised by viruses that had been embedded in apparently routine communications months earlier. These digital infections didn't simply disable vegan equipment. They caused defense systems to fire on their own vessels while displaying false sensor readings that made accurate assessment impossible. civilian communication networks throughout the system began broadcasting recordings of the Wolf 359 incident, carefully edited to maximize psychological impact on vegan audiences. The broadcasts were synchronized with targeted electromagnetic pulses that induced specific neurological responses in vegan physiology, creating panic reactions that spread through civilian populations faster than any physical weapon could have moved. Most significantly, Admiral Chen's fleet targeted not just military objectives, but the cultural and religious sites that gave meaning to vegan civilization. Ancient monuments that had stood for thousands of years were systematically destroyed, their obliteration broadcast throughout vegan space with commentary designed to demonstrate humanity's complete rejection of alien cultural values. "We have studied your species for months," Admiral Chen's broadcast to vegan high command explained. "We understand what you value, what gives your lives meaning, what you consider sacred and inviolate. We are systematically destroying all of it, not because these targets have military value, but because we want you to understand that nothing you cherish will survive your war against humanity." The psychological impact of this approach on vegan military personnel was immediate and devastating. War Admiral Zek Thul's forces found themselves defending not just military objectives, but the fundamental symbols of their civilization's identity. The emotional burden of watching their cultural heritage being methodically obliterated proved more demoralizing than any military defeat could have been. Within 6 hours, vegan resistance in the Vega Prime system had completely collapsed, not because their military forces had been destroyed, but because their personnel had lost the psychological will to continue fighting. Surrender came not through formal capitulation, but through the simple abandonment of defensive positions as vegan soldiers fled, to avoid witnessing further cultural destruction. The aftermath of the Battle of Vega Prime demonstrated the full scope of humanity's strategic transformation. Rather than occupying the conquered territory or attempting to establish military control, Admiral Chen's forces began implementing what she termed comprehensive civilization restructuring. Every aspect of vegan society within the system was systematically analyzed and modified to serve human strategic objectives. Vegan civilians found themselves subjects in vast social experiments designed to test theories about population control, cultural manipulation, and species-level psychological conditioning. Dr. Weber's research teams, now expanded to include specialists from throughout human space, used the captured populations to refine techniques that could be applied against any alien civilization. The industrial infrastructure that had supported vegan military operations was repurposed to produce weapons specifically designed for use against other alien species. Human engineers, working with technologies reverse-engineered from captured alien vessels, began constructing weapon systems that incorporated the biological and psychological vulnerabilities of dozens of different species. Most significantly, the human forces implemented what they called generational conditioning programs, designed to ensure that vegan children grew up with psychological orientations that made them incapable of opposing human authority. These programs went beyond simple indoctrination, using neurological modification techniques to literally rewire alien brain development. News of what had happened at Vega Prime spread throughout the galaxy despite human efforts to control information flow. The implications were immediately clear to every spacefaring civilization. Humanity had developed capabilities that could threaten the existence of any species that opposed them. More disturbing was the apparent transformation of human psychology itself, suggesting that the species that other aliens had known for centuries had been replaced by something fundamentally different. The Altarian Republic, which had maintained careful neutrality throughout the human-vegan conflict, suddenly found itself facing impossible strategic choices. Continued neutrality risked eventual human expansion into Altarian space, but alliance with the Vegans meant facing opponents who had demonstrated abilities that transcended conventional military thinking. The Crystalline Collective's response was even more dramatic. Their governing council, analyzing intelligence reports from Vega Prime, concluded that humanity now posed an existential threat to all silicon-based life forms in the galaxy. Emergency protocols were activated, and collective fleets began withdrawing from all systems adjacent to human space. Even the Andromedan Alliance, humanity's oldest allies, found themselves reconsidering their relationship with Earth. Alliance intelligence analysts studying human tactical innovations concluded that the technologies being deployed could be turned against any species with minimal modification. Alliance military planners began developing contingency plans for possible conflict with their former human partners. The most significant response came from the Galactic Council, the loose confederation of spacefaring civilizations that had maintained interstellar peace for over a millennium. For the first time in its history, the Council convened an emergency session to address what they termed the human problem. Representatives from 47 different species gathered to consider options that ranged from diplomatic intervention to coordinated military action against humanity. The debates that followed revealed the fundamental challenge that humanity's transformation posed to galactic civilization. Every previous conflict between spacefaring species had been contained by mutual recognition of certain basic limitations. Wars were fought for territory, resources, or political advantage, but no species had ever demonstrated the capability or willingness to threaten the complete extinction of their opponents. Humanity's new strategic doctrine suggested that they were prepared to do exactly that. The techniques developed through the study of captured vegans could potentially be applied to any alien species, while the psychological conditioning programs demonstrated human willingness to fundamentally alter other civilizations at the neurological level. Ambassador Kethvorin of the Centauran Federation summarized the situation in terms that resonated throughout the Council. "We are no longer dealing with the humanity we have known for centuries. These beings have transformed themselves into something that threatens the basic assumptions underlying our civilization. They have chosen to embrace capabilities that we have all deliberately avoided developing, not because we lacked the knowledge, but because we understood the implications." The Council's final resolution, passed by unanimous vote of all member species, established protocols that effectively quarantined humanity from the rest of galactic civilization. All trade agreements were suspended, diplomatic relations were severed, and a monitoring network was established to track human expansion and technological development. More significantly, the Council authorized the development of weapons and tactics specifically designed to counter human capabilities. Every member species was required to contribute to research programs focused on understanding and defeating the technologies that humanity had deployed at Vega Prime. The result was the largest collaborative military research effort in galactic history. But even as the galaxy united against them, humanity continued its transformation. The criminals released from Titan had proven that conventional moral constraints were incompatible with effective warfare against alien species. Their success led to fundamental changes in human military doctrine, educational systems, and social organization. Earth's government, analyzing the strategic situation, concluded that humanity's survival required the systematic abandonment of the ethical frameworks that had previously defined human civilization. If other species viewed humanity as an existential threat, then humanity would embrace that role completely and develop capabilities that made such threats credible. The final document in this historical archive consists of a single paragraph from Admiral Marcus Sterling's last communication to Earth Command, transmitted shortly before his disappearance during a classified operation in the Rigel system. "We have become what the situation required us to become. The weak versions of ourselves, constrained by mercy and limited by compassion, could never have survived what the galaxy has shown us. We mourned their passing once, but now we understand that their sacrifice was necessary. The humans who emerge from this conflict will be strong enough to ensure that no alien species will ever again consider humanity suitable prey. We have learned to embrace the darkness that others fear to acknowledge, and in doing so, we have guaranteed our survival among the stars." End of document. Historical note. This document represents one of the last comprehensive accounts of the transformation period in human history. Subsequent events, including the development of consciousness transfer technology and the establishment of the human hegemony, fall outside the scope of this particular archive. Researchers seeking information about later developments should consult the restricted archives maintained by the Department of Xenological Security. Classification status: declassified by order of the Hegemony Council, 2847 TST. Distribution authorized for educational purposes only. Commercial reproduction prohibited without explicit authorization from the Ministry of Historical Information.